Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Mcginnis, who's an author, TED speaker, and a host of FOMO Sapiens, the FOMO Sapiens podcast. Welcome to the show. How are you, Patrick?
Hey there. How are you?
Nice of you to join us. Where are you joining us from?
Right now, I typically live in New York City, but right now I am in the great state of Maine, where I grew up, and I'm actually my parents' house. So
nice.
This is the homestead where I grew up.
The new studio. Is this where you grew up as well?
Yeah, this is my childhood home. I was brought home from the hospital to this very home.
Love it. Have you been there the whole time during this?
No, I stayed in New York City. I was busy trying to launch a book, and so I stayed in New York because I figured it would be easier to focus. And I also thought, as much as I love spending time at home, if this were to go on for 6 months, which it has, I thought it would be better to just come and go a bit. So basically, every time I come here, I just take a COVID test right away. As soon as I get my results, I then take off the mask and can hang out. So
nice. It seems so easy in the UK to get a test. I mean, the US. It's like everyone I speak to is like, yeah, I get a test. And it's like in the UK, it's like super difficult to get a test.
Well, you can get a test, but getting the results within the problem is it takes 2 weeks. So up in Maine, where I am now, you can get your test the same day, the results.
Oh, okay. That's better.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. They got like one in the White House now, I've seen, like a few hours. Like they've got their own special one. They're not sharing with anyone.
So like, you have to be the president to get a COVID test.
Yeah, exactly. Before we jump in, Patrick, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and sort of your journey to where we are today.
Sure. So I started out my career on Wall Street doing venture capital and private equity. I did that for a number of years, was a graduate of Harvard Business School. And then in 2008, everything blew up. I was working for a division of AIG. The company went bankrupt and was taken over by the government. It was a great lesson to me about the power of diversification. I basically started at that point to diversify my career by doing investments on the side outside of my day job. That turned into a book called The 10% Entrepreneur. And then when that book came out, I invented the term FOMO when I was a student at Harvard Business School, and people started wanting to talk about that. And so I decided to write a book about
funny, all right.
And a podcast called FOMO Sapiens, and so here I am.
Wow, what a cool journey!
I know.
I feel like I'm almost doing that myself. Like, but I'm like 10 years behind you of sort of trying to diversify my career. And I started this business. And I've got the podcast. I'm just some steps behind on this process as well. Well, there's a lot going on. So let's start with you've got the new book, right? Coming out. It's already out now? Tell people a bit more about that. That's how I came across you. Super excited for it. But what a time to launch a book during this as well. So tell everyone about the book first and foremost.
Yeah, launching a book during this period of time has been so difficult. I'm not complaining because it is what it is, but there's just people are very preoccupied with other things. So I don't think a lot of people are reading. But we've been lucky that it's taken off in its own way and it's doing pretty well. But basically the point of the book is called Fear of Missing Out: Practical Decision-Making in a World of Overwhelming Choice. And basically the idea here is that we live in a time where we are overwhelmed with choice, whether it's what to watch on Netflix or what to do to deal with the current economic and healthcare situation. There's so many things we have to decide. And so my book is all about how to make smarter, faster decisions when we're faced with all of the things that we have to decide on. And so that's really something I've implemented in my own life, but also I interview tons of clinical psychologists and business leaders and entrepreneurs about how to make better decisions.
Yeah. Super timely as well, right? Like given everything going on, that is one of the big challenges. I certainly faced it as a leader of this business as well. It's like so overwhelming with everything going on. And obviously that's the kind of nature of the book is, making decisions when it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot of crisis going on around you. So I'm sure people are very much connected with the book.
Yeah, I'm hearing back from a lot of people who've been using the book, and the big feedback that I'm getting is that, what it really does is I think a lot of us feel like we are good at making decisions. We make decisions all the time, right? And so the typical reaction that I get from people when we talk about this subject is that, well, I'm good at making decisions, but my wife or my friend or my kid or my parent or my colleague, they're terrible. we all think that we're good and other people are bad. But in fact, if we step back and look at how we make our decisions, most people don't even really sort of think about it. You just sort of, you do it reflexively. And then when you get stuck, you sort of just get frustrated. And so what I sort of give you in the book is really a system to step back and categorize decisions based on their importance, and then move past the sort of unimportant ones very quickly, and then have a process for the big ones that'll move you forward so you don't get stuck. Because I used to get stuck all the time. I mean, I was constantly paralyzed by indecision. And now, having developed that muscle to make decisions, I got to tell you, life is just a lot easier.
Yeah, I can only imagine, and I'm super excited to start using it myself. As a co-founder, that's half my battle is decision making decisions, and now having a framework and a process to work towards is I mean, to work with and have that foundation and structure just makes things so much easier.
Yeah, especially when you have a co-founder, as you mentioned. This is not just about you; it's also about getting other people. So you may be decisive, right? It may be that Chris, you have no issues here, but it may be that your co-founder or your business partner does. And so you also need to have strategies to help push them into decision making.
And that relates across any business, any leadership role, any organization as well. So it's super relevant. Just want to go back for a second. Obviously, on LinkedIn, the first thing that stood out when I first came across your LinkedIn profile was like inventor of FOMO. And I was like, I've got to reach out to this guy. And just after that, fear of missing out, inventor, I was like, really? How did that happen? And how does it feel that like millions of people around the world use that terminology?
Yeah, it feels, I mean, there's no words to describe it. It's so funny. And I think it's really cute because like my family members, every time they see FOMO someone, they send it to me. But it's
oh my God, how many messages you getting?
Text today, I saw FOMO here. Or the next door neighbor saw FOMO on television. Yes, I'm glad to hear it, but you don't need to tell me every time. But no, it's a lot of fun because everywhere you go in the world, people know the topic. And so it's just fun when people realize and hear the story. They always smile, and it's a great point of connection. And the story is that I was living in New York City in the early 2000s, right out of college, and I lived through September 11th. I was very sort of right by my apartment. I saw that with my own eyes. And the next day I woke up and I just said, life is really short. I need to live every moment like it's last. I got to take advantage of every option or possibility that I can. And that's what I did. And then shortly thereafter, I entered Harvard Business School, which is what I call a choice-rich environment. I mean, you can do anything you want. There's so many things that are offered to you, whether it's parties or trips or classes or interviews for jobs or you name it. There's just a lot going on. And I decided, because I had this sort of carpe diem mindset, that I wanted to do everything. And I tried to the point where I was constantly stressed out. And I realized that actually, like, all of this opportunity and choice was causing me stress rather than making me happy. And I started sort of teasing people, my friends, because we'd go to like 7 parties on a Friday night. And so, as soon as we get there, we'd be out the door for the next one. And so I started referring to that as a fear of missing out. I shortened it to FOMO. And I wrote an article in the school newspaper way back in 2004, all about this new word that I'd come up with. And then I graduated and the word was used on campus, and eventually it was spread into the corporate world. And then in 2013, it made it into the Oxford Dictionary. So
it's in the dictionary as well. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, thank you, England.
Yeah, thank you. No, God, what a story. Because when I saw it, I was like, you see some weird and wonderful things on people's LinkedIn profiles. And I was like, really? I've got to do some research into this as well. Yeah.
Well, I would say the thing is, most people, and I love LinkedIn, but half the people are like innovator,
futurist.
Yeah, like all these people who put things that I'm like, really? Like, are you truly a visionary thinker? Like, it's like,
what does that even mean? How do you define that?
Exactly.
It's super difficult.
Mine's for real, I promise.
Yeah. What in terms of this new book, what was the main inspiration? You've written many books before. What were some of the sort of top things that drove you to writing this new one?
So really, it's funny, when I went on book tour for my first book, The 10% Entrepreneur, I did book tour. I went everywhere. I mean, the book came out all over the place in all these different languages. And so, in the UK, it did really well. So I was in the UK a lot, but also, everywhere from like Senegal to Myanmar to Guinea-Bissau to Brazil, all over the place. And what would always happen regardless of where I was in the world, is that people would want to take a selfie with me because I came up with FOMO. And so it occurred to me that people, it's a topic they want to discuss. And I think what's important for us as people who are creators and business people is to listen to the market. And the market was giving me an undisputed message. The market was saying people want to talk about FOMO. And so then I thought, well, okay, great. So I know that there's an interest in this topic, but like, what could I possibly, what can I say about this? Is this justify writing a book? And so as I researched the topic a little bit more, I realized actually it's become a major area of study in the world of clinical psychology, and that actually like this is something that is paralytic to a lot of people, and that in the business world, it's also a major issue. And so I'm a business writer. I like to focus on business topics. I'm a venture capitalist. And I thought there was really an opportunity here to take this topic that a lot of people think is kind of funny or lighthearted and actually look at it in a deep way and see how we can make better decisions by addressing it.
Yeah. What were some of the findings that you found during your research that most surprised you, that stood out?
Well, it's amazing. So I started reading these psychology journals, that are like people like me, like University of Essex professor writes for the Journal of Clinical Psychology, that kind of like, people who are like real people. And what was so interesting was, number one, how this actually has sort of physical effects on people. It causes physical repercussions on your wellness. It causes mental health issues. It causes issues with your finances. People spend money. There was a great
because of the fear of missing out, or just spend that extra party or the extra holiday.
Exactly.
Like, I'm going to get a loan just to go make sure I don't miss this holiday.
Absolutely. So that kind of blew my mind. Like just the fact that there's all this attention. But then the couple other things that I thought were interesting is, number one, is how this does sort of, there's a genetic component. It's in our evolutionary biology.
Okay.
Humans were looking at that, they didn't have Instagram, but they were well aware of what the next person over from them had when they were like setting up the camp, when they were nomadic. One guy had like, somebody killed like a buffalo, and this guy over here is feeling FOMO because, it's literally survival or not, right?
Literally. It's built in our DNA.
Cool. And the other thing I thought was quite interesting that I guess I had never really thought about deeply is that how much FOMO is used against us as a marketing tool.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. So good. They're so good at it, aren't they? They're so good at they know exactly what to say, what visuals to put in front of you. Yeah.
It's used all the time. I mean, think about how many times you get an email from a retailer. Don't miss out. 30%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're literally saying like, don't miss out. Right. So it's
I noticed that more when I got into sales. It was just glaring, because before that, if you're about doing the research or kind of working in the industry, you can miss that. And now I look at it like it's so obvious, but obviously it's only obvious to me because I've worked in sales for the last 14 years. And obviously I have the podcast, even our own sales, branding and marketing, we use similar tactics and it works. You think no way people are going to, let's say fall for that, but no way is this going to make a difference in someone's decision making, but it does. It makes a huge difference as well. What are some of the practical frameworks or examples you share in the book of things that people can do?
So one of the big strategies that I used in the book, and this is for FOMO, but also for what's called FOBO, or fear of a better option, which is the other foe I invented.
Fear of a better option. I do love that one.
Yeah, it never got famous until, well, I'm making it famous now, but it didn't get famous when FOMO did, even though they're like created at the same time. I did this TED video called How to Make Faster Decisions. And basically what happens a lot of times when we feel these foes, FOMO and FOBO, is that we spend, when you're feeling fear and stress, little things feel bigger than they are. And so, for example, say you're ordering, this happens to me all the time. You go like Deliveroo in the UK or Seamless in the US, you want to order food to your house. Well, there's like 400 choices. And so I'm supposed to be immune to this stuff. I'll spend like 40 minutes trying to pick something to eat for dinner and just quit and eat cereal, right? It's like the small decisions become bigger. And so what I basically, in the book and in the video, I classify decisions in one of three categories: high stakes, low stakes, or no stakes. high stakes decisions are things that'll affect you in the medium to long term. It's like, who should I marry? What house should I buy? What job should I take?
Yeah.
Low stakes are things that, you won't remember having made that decision in a month. It's like, oh, what printer should I buy?
What restaurant should we eat at?
Yeah. And then no stakes are things that you won't remember in a couple of days. It's like, what shirt should I wear? What should I have for lunch? And so for one of the things that I love to do and tell people to do, and you can start right now doing this, is when you get to a no stakes decision, you got to outsource that. And I outsource it to like my phone or my watch. So for example, say
automate all of those decisions.
Totally.
Free yourself up.
Should I go for a run today? Should I go for a run today? Like, most of the time I'll know the answer. But if I'm stuck on that, then I don't want to spend the next 40 minutes hemming and hawing about whether to go for a run. So I'll say, fine, I'm going to look at my phone. The even number, if it's time is even, I'm going to go for the run. If it's odd, I'm not going to go.
Is that what you do?
Boom. Are you
really?
I just look at it's 11:30 here, so it's okay. It's even. I'm going to go for a run today. No, I'm not going actually because I did.
No, I just love the simplicity of it.
Done. And I'll ask somebody to make, Mom, should I go for a run today? Yes or no? Done. I do that all the time. So outsourcing in unimportant decisions gives you the freedom to focus on things that matter.
Yeah, love that. I do a lot of that with technology and automation. So much now. I'm also obsessed. Even at home, like my entire home is automated. Like food being ordered is automated. Deliveries of essential items that I know that I'm going to need every month, they just come because I've automated that. So like taking away all those decisions that I just don't want to have to think about, it just happens. And I've gone a bit obsessive of it, to be honest. But it's freed up. It's funny because when my internet went down a few weeks ago, right, and all of these automations are run by my router, right, and my smart hub, and they all stopped working, and I realized at that moment how many decisions that my automations and my house was making without me. It didn't what? I was like 2 weeks ago, and my wife was like, "Oh, this hasn't arrived." I was like, "Well, because the router's down, or this hasn't happened, or this reminder hasn't, reminded us about it." There's a lot of reminders in working in it. I was like, wow, I really do rely quite heavily on technology to run a lot of these small micro decisions that you're talking about. Yeah, super interesting. What about research? Did you interview other leaders during this? If so, what were some of the stories that stood out?
I did. It was so fun because unlike the first book, where I'd never done this before, like this time around, I kind of got it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to interview some really amazing people. I'm just going to like go crazy. And so one of my favorite interviews was with the CEO of Hotel Tonight about how they actually created a digital tool to overcome indecision. So when they have a daily sort of special called the Daily Drop, and when you're presented with the opportunity, you're given 15 minutes, then it's gone forever. So they
is that like a price for a room or something? What was that?
That extra discount. So you get that deal, but like you cannot delay.
Well, that's the ultimate fear of missing out, though, isn't it? That's a really good example of they've made a brand around fear of missing out every week.
Fantastic tool. So I talked to him, but I also interviewed like everybody from a neurobiologist to the head of Opus Dei in Canada, clinical psychologists, venture capitalists, VCs or entrepreneurs. So all these really interesting people that informed what I wrote about in the book. And so it ended up being, because, when you're writing a book about clinical psychology and about this kind of stuff, it's like, I have my perspective, but I also want to make sure that I get really good expertise in here because, I'm a business person. I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I want to make sure I cover those bases appropriately.
Yeah. What were some of the questions you were asking them? Were you asking them to share their own journeys of an example of when they felt the fear of missing out? If so, what were some of the things they came back with?
Absolutely. I think we all, it's funny because people always share with me what gives them FOMO, right? It's like this thing, I meet somebody and they're like, they want to tell me. And so, and it's most of the things that people feel FOMO about they're not deep. They're small. I mean, we all have deeper FOMO too, but it'll be like, I feel FOMO about, when I go on Instagram or something. But I think at the end of the day, if we look at what the deeper sort of connection is between all of these things, when we feel FOMO, it's because we have a perception that there's something great out there happening. And we haven't taken the time to unpack whether perception is reality or perception is deception. And so,
which is social media makes that a lot more difficult.
Right? Filters. Like it looks nice right now. We both look like we're in nice places. It may be, by the way,
it's pouring down with rain outside right now.
I don't know. Maybe there's a smelly dog right underneath me. There isn't, but you just don't know.
Yeah, I completely get it. It's like I always say to my wife, like, because a lot of her friends are single, and she's now obviously married with her kids, and her sister and her best friends are always out partying, and she's sitting there scrolling through Instagram, and she's like, oh man, I would love to be at that party or at this and ring. And she's like, I'm like, you're just torturing yourself by just constantly scrolling through it. And don't get me wrong, I feel the same way. Like, I don't have many friends that are running startups, and I can't go on those holidays, or I can't take that time out because I have commitments. And I do think, oh, I'm missing out on that sometimes. And but then it's funny because I look at it from their perspective, and they look at me the other way around, of they're missing out on running their own business or following their dreams the way they see I am. So everyone has their own unique perspective.
It's human nature. We're competitive beings. We see, I mean, I think about this, like, I love LinkedIn. We both do. Obviously, we're here right now. But when I go on LinkedIn and I see my friends and classmates from school who are doing amazing things, like, I always feel it. I just can't, even though they may be doing something I have no, it's like, oh, CEO of a biotech startup. Like, first of all, I know nothing about biotech, so nobody's going to give me that job. Number two is I don't really want to do that anyway, but I see it and I'm like, oh man, like,
Yeah. Did you ever feel fear of missing out when you made a decision to leave your career and pursue this career, or does that ever come around for you?
No, I'll tell you why. Because the decision was based on an informed decision. I had worked in that world. I knew what it was. I lived through a very difficult time where my firm blew up, and I was like, this is no longer for me. I want to create something for myself. And I think what happens is when you're building something for yourself, as you're doing and as I'm doing, you don't have FOMO because you're sort of like, I'm in the right place. Like, I guess if you
supposed to be in this place,
if you fail and then you see all your friends who stuck behind, perhaps you're like, oh, you have regrets or something. But in general, when you love what you're doing and you believe in it, you're not going to spend a lot of time focusing on other people, right? You're focusing on what you're building.
It's true. I don't have time to be honest. A lot. I'll be honest. I'm so busy with work a lot of times that I don't. It's when I do take time out that I actually end up looking at social media now and again. And I very rarely have time anyway. So it's I'm too busy focusing on hitting my targets and goals of where we want to be. It's funny because a lot of friends of mine are like, Chris, we sent you, messages on Instagram and Facebook. I'm like, I just don't check that. I don't have the time. Where do you have the time in a day to constantly be checking all of the variety of social media platforms? It's like
we need to have one. Like, it's too much. Like, who has to check? It's terrible. Like, who can look at that?
Yeah, you missed my birthday party. I'm like, where? Like, oh, it's a Facebook message. I was like, man, like, you need to give me a phone call or something during this time. What about the current events? How has that affected your outlook on your work? Obviously, you kind of coined the fear of going out, FOGO, which was interesting. But how has it shifted your views, or has it shifted views on the work? What are your perceptions?
It's been so interesting having lived this in New York City, which was the global epicenter for a period of time. It was a difficult time, and it probably will be again. But I tried to also sort of keep on the hat of a clinician or a researcher, and trying to think like, well, let me look at this. I'm going to step out of my own daily drama and just kind of look at this studiously. And what I saw is in the beginning of the pandemic lockdown. So we locked down in New York City around the 13th, I believe, of March. So the weekend before, actually, I had family in town visiting, and I went to probably to see one of the last Broadway plays before they shut everything down. Like, it was like, now I look back and it's like, I did the last this, I did the last that, I did I remember trying to buy toilet paper because my mom was like, you need to buy toilet paper. There's a ride on toilet. So there was this FOMO around just like getting toilet paper, buying canned goods, like getting all the supplies, this panic buying, right? And then once we went inside and went into the quarantine, I remember seeing on Twitter a lot of conversation like, well, it looks like FOMO's dead and, Corona killed FOMO. And for a couple of weeks, I sort of thought that's actually quite interesting because, for the first time in years, I have nowhere to go. And so I was reading.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
I read these books I'd been meaning to read for years. I watched like Succession, which I'd wanted to watch for like 3 years. I was watching all the streaming, this, that, and the other. But then, what happened, of course, is that number one is, we all want to have these big plans of like, I'm going to get super ripped, or I'm going to learn how to do this or that, but I'm going to write a book, or, all these sorts of things. But about a month into it, I realized basically, the one thing that causes FOMO in our lives that goes without fail to give us FOMO is our devices, our phones and everything. And the one thing I had with me the whole time was this bad boy right here. And in fact, my sort of Zoom social life and my amount of time spent on social media went through the roof. And so therefore, I really believe FOMO has come back in a huge way. And it's come back also like, I go on Instagram now, all my friends who live in London are like off in Ibiza living their best lives while I'm like stuck in New York. And so as Europe, and we'll see what happens, but Europe, people are like, everybody's in the south of France, and like I'm like afraid to leave my apartment. And so I feel massive FOMO. I'm like, God, I wish I lived in Europe right now, right? I could be, hanging out. Instead, I'm like just excited to like go to the grocery store. So it's been interesting in that way. I think, what I've learned here is that FOMO, human nature cannot be changed. And therefore we revert back to the same sorts of behaviors.
Yeah. You did make a really interesting point though, because during COVID, right, so many people started investing in their own personal health and well-being and just learning new skills in general. I was thinking, why is that? Obviously is that you're locked inside, so you need something to do. But a big part of that, like I think which you tapped into, is that there isn't this party you're going to miss out on. There isn't this holiday or this birthday you're going to miss out on. There isn't all of these things that you're normally so wrapped up in that you don't even get a time to just, where's the Chris time, like me, to invest in myself? And I saw so many people doing that. And then soon as, my wife's a good example, she was started doing exercising more and sort of doing more, focusing on her own health and well-being. But as soon as lockdown was lifted and people were like, oh, this birthday party is happening, this family gathering event, that all went out the window. And I said to her the other day, I was like, what happened to the exercise routine? What happened to the daily check-ins with yourself, right? She's like, oh no, but this is happening or that's happening. And I was like, so you've been locked back into the FOMO.
No, it's
immediately.
So true. I was out in the Hamptons, and again with the same friend who had didn't want to go in the supermarket, and she had been super careful for months and months and months and hadn't seen anybody. And this was her first time with people, but we were all at a big house in distance, and we were invited to a barbecue, and none of us had been in a group. And we go to this, it's all British people actually, so I'll blame the Brits. And they'd all had COVID.
They can't help themselves.
Well, they weren't afraid, right? Because they'd all had it and they had antibodies or whatever. We didn't. And it was insane to me how quickly you just sort of forgot, and you were like, human nature is to get together in a group. And I found myself talking to like 7 people in a circle. And then I was like, what am I doing, right? And so I stepped back and we ended up leaving. And the next morning, the big conversation was like, why did we do that? Now, this was a while ago. Everything is fine. But it's human nature to want to be with other people, to want to participate in events. And so like staying home and being, doing sort of like all the self-care sounds great. But how many people did the things they thought they were going to do? Everybody thought they were going to get like rock hard abs. How many people did it?
A few people started off and they were like, I shared that same experience. By the way, I went to a kind of party in the park, like and I was like, all right, I wasn't too sure about it. This is very early on. I was like, I didn't really want to go, but my wife was like, I really want to go. We need to get out the house. So I was like, okay, we go there.
Well, your wife sounds super fun. I definitely want to.
She is. So I am the drag. She is super fun, outgoing, going out. I'm partying. I'm just like, no, I'll stay at home. And we go there. And as you said, within the first 5 to even when people were arriving, they were kissing each other on the cheeks, and they were like, "Oh, sorry, ha ha ha!" And I was like, "This is just." I was like, "This is." And my daughter was there. She's 2, right? So you ask a 2-year-old to social distance? Yeah. She's running around hugging everyone. I was like, "Well, it's too late at this point. If I'm gonna catch it, it's probably gonna be now." I was a bit annoyed and frustrated, but I was like, "We should never have come in the first place." It's super difficult. Yeah. You're right. What about the podcast? Tell us more about the podcast, the name behind it as well, which is interesting. Sapiens. Where did that come from? The inspiration.
FOMO Sapiens was this idea actually that I was looking to name. So I was looking to do a podcast. I got approached by a media partner and said, "You want to do a show?" And I said, "Sure." And I was going to do it about my first book, 10% Entrepreneur, but then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, this FOMO is such a great topic and people want to talk about this, and it's a fun idea, and I love it. And I'm going to be writing a book about it. So it really makes sense for me, and it's broad. And so I started thinking about names, and I just talked to, my solution to everything and is basically like talk to as many people as possible and get as many ideas as possible, and then make a list of everything and just wait until the perfect one hits. And I know it. I know it when I see it, right?
You know when you see
So
it.
as I've talked to more and more people, somebody came up with that idea, and the minute they said it, I knew it was perfect. I called my attorney, who's a patent attorney, and we got a trademark on it. And then another friend of mine from college, I have a logo, which is the progression of man, from the caveman to the man. And that was his idea. And so I have a person on my team who does graphic design. She put together this beautiful logo. And so that we were off to the races with the name and everything. And then I started to think, well, what is this show really about? And so I started reaching out to my friends who I thought would be interesting guests. And I know some people who are super interesting, cool people that are, like the COO of Reddit is a friend of mine from college, and other people like that. And then over time, you know how it goes is as your show kind of takes off and gets more popular, people start calling you. And so I've been getting amazing inbound pitches from some great guests. And so just kind of, now I'm on like episode, I don't know,
What are you on?
66 or something.
How long have you been going for?
Geez, now about 2 years.
Yeah. Where can people check it out? It's Harvard, right?
So it's distributed by Harvard Business Review, but you can find it on all of the,
all of the platforms.
Almost Sapiens, 2 words. It's on every platform. And, it's been cool. And I'm sure you have this happen too. It's like, I had a guy the other day in Brazil. But listen, I'm indecisive in my life right now. I'm really going through some stuff. And I have a drive every day, and I found your podcast, and I listened to all the episodes. I mean, listen to like all 60.
It's funny how people, when they find your podcast, the first thing you do, and I'm the same, by the way, you end up binge listening. If you really enjoy it, that is obviously, you just go through it.
And so like that, it's so cool, right? I felt so pleased to hear that. But, I think that it's a topic that resonates with people. And it's so, if you like it, if you like the sound of this voice and you like good conversation, FOMO Sapiens, check it out.
Yeah. Do you think that like talking about the subject every single day has made your fear of missing out less, less present? Because it's just always in your mind. It's like you talk about every single day. You wrote a book on it. You used to have a podcast about it. Did it help in any way or not at all? The human nature just takes over.
When I feel indecisive, I literally stop and say to myself, you wrote a book on this topic. You've given people tools. If you can't do it for yourself, who are you to talk to anybody else?
Good.
Therefore, I deal with it. And I also with other people, like, if somebody says like, oh, I say like, shall we have dinner Saturday night? And they say, well, let's decide later. No, I wrote a book about decision-making. Let's be decisive, right? And so it's sort of like a great way to push past indecision.
No, I get it. How did the TED thing come about? Did they come to you, or was it a TED, like the official TED or TEDx? Because I know there's like a million different ones that are happening these days.
So it was official TED, and it was part of this really cool.
That adds to the pressure, because I know how much more work they go and more rehearsals you have to do, and go and tell everyone how that works, because I think it's interesting.
It was wild, actually. So I had wanted to do a TED talk for a long time, and I had thought about doing a TEDx, and TEDx is great. Yeah, but I had a friend who used to work at TED, and he said, listen, why don't you, if you really want to do this, like hold out for the TED. And so I said, okay, fine. And then it turned out that I was introduced to somebody who works there on the business team. And I grabbed a coffee with her just to get her advice. I think a lot of times, like when you go in trying to pitch people, turns them off. And so I wasn't trying to pitch her. I was like, just like, I'd love to talk about my ideas with you and get your advice about how I could, come up with an idea that might be interesting for you guys. And so we talked. And that was it. And then like 6 months later, she pinged me and said, listen, we're doing a video series with Dropbox. It's a different format. Instead of being in front of an audience, you're in a studio, and it's like almost like it's like a short. It's like 6 minutes. Yeah. And I was sort of like, that's actually really cool. And so they gave me a writer, and we worked on it together. And it was really helpful to have a writer. But at the end of the day, you sort of have to. It's on you. You have to.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And I was actually like, while we were preparing this, this was a year ago. I was actually in the middle of Central Asia. I was in like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan on this big trip. So I'm like, I didn't really have internet, and I was sort of like trying to figure it out. And so I'm like in the middle of Uzbekistan, going back and forth with my TED coach. And when I got back, I had 3 weeks before taping, and I had put on all this weight on holiday. So I decided I need to lose like as much weight as I could to look good on the camera. And I worked out so much that I actually like injured myself, and I had to like limped into the taping. It was a lot. But the great thing was that they're so, they really are just great people to work with. And so I did the taping about a year ago. It came out in December, first on Facebook and LinkedIn, and later it's on their site. And since then it's done something like, I think like 1.3 or 1.4 million views. And
that's how I came across you.
It's crazy. It's
that's how, by the way, that is how when I reached out to you, I'm not sure if I said that, but that's how I came across was that video.
How did you find it? I'm so curious.
I literally binge watch TED Talks. So I think I literally, the exact way I did it, I just put, you can search by categories, and I put like business or leadership. I can't remember the exact name they have it. And I just binge watch them. I listen or watch them whilst doing work. So I'll have them like on one screen, I'll have that, and I'll be doing work, but I can do both. I'm still taking in information. I love it. I just love it. And I just go next. And I love the fact I don't know what I'm going to get next. That's actually part of the enjoyment for me, is that I just go, right? And because they're so short as well, you can consume 5, 6, 7, 8, right? In an hour and a half. And so that's how. And I was like, oh, I need to reach out to Patrick. So a lot of my guests have come that way. Like that's another super, like I'm super grateful and humbled to be able to do this for a living anyway. And the fact that I get to watch a video with someone like yourself and then be here speaking to you a few weeks later is like super exciting for me, because then I get to actually ask questions. Because I normally leave each of those with a few questions like, oh, let me see if Patrick's available to go on the show.
Well, I love it, because there's nothing that's more fun than to talk about something that you've been working on with somebody who thinks deeply about it. And then I always learn something, like always learn something.
Exactly. That's the thing I always take away from these shows as well. Like the amount I learn from our guests is, no degree can teach me some of those things. And when I'm asking questions, it's not because I've sat there and done loads of research. It's like I'm just genuinely interested. Like I have a genuine interest in learning more. And I think that if you do that, it comes across for everyone listening as well. But last thing, you still, how do you manage? When I first reached out to you and I looked at your background, I was like, how are you managing all of these things at once? So are you still running the business, the advisory firm that you have, or is that kind of running on the side? How do you manage that?
So really what I figured out, it's really two things, because I was for a period of time completely overwhelmed all the time.
I bet. That's what I was thinking. Looking at your LinkedIn alone, I was like, wow, how are you doing all of these things?
Actually, it's three things. Okay, number one is that everything I do, there's complementary elements. So I will, everything, when the podcast supports the speaking in the books, what I learn there supports the podcast. What I learn there makes me better as an investor. The investments I see make me better in terms of I can find guests. So like it's all self-reinforcing, and that's number one. Number two is when I see things that aren't part of that and I have opportunities, I generally say no to them. So I'm really thoughtful about saying no to stuff that doesn't fit. And that's the FOMO thing, right? I mean, I invented the word FOMO.
So many things that you're excited about that you want to say yes to do, but you just
am the king of FOMO, right? So like I had an opportunity, the great example, I had an opportunity this week to do something in the politics world, which really excited me. And it very much fits with what I do. But I felt like, geez, I cannot add more to the plate right now. I'm going to literally, it's like too many good things. So I was able to find a way to basically partner with somebody else so that they could help me do that thing. And I wouldn't have to do as much, and it would fit in my plate, but at the same time, I could still do it. So I do that a lot. I partner with people, I delegate, or I say no. And the third thing is I do have a really great team of people that I work with. So that allows me, to be really thoughtful about what I should be spending my time on and what I should get help on. Because otherwise, I always think to myself when I'm doing something that just isn't a good fit for what I need to be doing, it's like, did I do all these things just so that I could send a bunch of emails to, like, no, I didn't. And so I should invest in somebody to help me to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree, because people always ask me that same question, like, Chris, you do a show every single day.
Yeah, that's insane, by the way. I don't know how you do it. So.
but it's the same as what you're saying, because those people that are guests also speak at our events, also people that I partner with for our workshops, also people are customers. So it all links together. The same people that I'm speaking to as customers or a host or speaking at our global online summits are the same people that come on the show. So it all intertwines. It looks like a lot of work, but it all makes sense in the same way you described, right? It all links together and everything benefits one another. So if last week we had 7,000 people join our online summit we did live, and the 50 speakers that joined within a week were all people that came on the show.
No, that's great.
So they're people that I've spoken to before, that we've added value to each other over the years. That at that point when I reach out and say, hey, we're doing a summit, can you join us? So like, sure, because there's a mutual benefit to be able to do that. So that's the benefit of having this podcast, similar with your book, right? As well, it all links together. But look, I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna have to let you go at some point. I know. for before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you give to everyone to deal with their FOMO, what would that be? And then where can people check out more about your work, grab a copy of the book, etc.?
So my advice to everybody today, and I think it's particularly relevant right now, is be grateful. So be grateful you have options in the first place. If you have FOMO or FOBO, it means that you have choices. And I think a lot of times having more choices makes us feel stressed out, but actually you should be happy that you have those choices, because when you're on your deathbed and you look back, you're going to be like, wow, I lived such a rich and full life because I could do all of these things. And I think that's, there's a lot of people out there who don't have choices because of illness or poverty or, a lot of other things that marginalize people. And so I always try to remember that every day. And, I'm sure Jay Shetty. So him on my podcast, we'll be running that in the fall. And like, he has his book coming out and I read it and it's great. And he talks about like this gratefulness meditation, what he does, which at the beginning I read that I was like, oh, it's kind of, I don't know. That's not me. But I have to tell you, if you actually do it, if you actually take a few minutes every day to think about 3 things that you feel thankful for, it actually changes your mindset. So try it out. I thought it was a little like woo woo in the beginning, but then once I started doing it, I actually kind of liked it. So
yeah, I do that, by the way. I'm not consistent with it, but I do it in the morning because I suffer from anxiety, and that's something that I find it helps. So if I wake up in the morning and think about 3 things that I'm thankful for, because normally what do you do when you wake up in the morning? You think of the stress or the things you got to do. Most people don't wake out of bed. I got that piece of work to complete.
Where is the coffee? That's what I'm bad in the morning, so I don't. I'm not that guy. Like
coffee first, and then you're allowed to think. Is that what it is? Like the only thoughts allowed is like get coffee, and then your brain's allowed to run where it wants to run.
Don't look at a screen for the first 15 minutes. Just let yourself wake up. Yeah, that's what I do. So, but, no, I'm glad that works for you, because I think it does work for a lot of people. And if you're not, give it a try. There's no downside.
If they think of negative things, then it kind of defines your day almost, right? And I found that as long as, because again, most people sit there the night before they go to sleep, and then when they wake up, they're worrying about things they haven't done, tasks, etc., etc. Whereas opposed to starting your day with, what am I grateful for today? The fact that I'm healthy during this, the fact that my wife and child and I have a roof over our heads. These are all things that we take for granted every day. Like, I've seen a lot of people complaining they couldn't go on holiday this year. I'm like, come on. Like, yes, you can't go on holiday, but
be great.
Be great, exactly.
Yeah. Like, that's a massive own goal, to just start the day worrying about stuff you can't even change, right? I mean, I think we agree. Yeah,
and where can people learn more about you? Grab a copy of the book.
So the best place to find me is at patrickmcginnis.com. There you'll find links to Amazon and other places. There's a Kindle version out. We're coming out with the audiobook in the fall. And then the podcast is FOMO Sapiens. You can find that wherever you find your podcast. It's 2 words. So check it out. And I'm obviously also on social. So Twitter at PJ Mcginnis and Instagram at Patrick J. Mcginnis. My Instagram, I promise, full of good stuff.
Nice. Well, appreciate you saying yes. It's been a really cool conversation. And I look forward to reading the book and checking out the podcast as well. And see you again soon. All right. Thanks a lot.
See you in the UK, hopefully, and not.
Definitely. See you later. Thanks.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye.